Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
It is something we know that we should be doing, but we sometimes avoid it, sort of like avoiding the dentist. You know you should be going, but you try not to if you know you need to have some work done. I'm talking here about financial planning. It is your future. It is so important, but a lot of times we kind of push it off to the side or we assume it's being taken care of properly. And we're going to look at all of that today with an amazing financial planner. Nicholas Pihl is on the program with us. Nicholas, welcome. How are you?
Good. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. And it's necessary to plan financially for your future. When you work with people, what are you hearing now? What typically are they saying? What are they thinking? What are they avoiding right now?
Right. So I mostly work with retirees. So to some extent, it's people who have procrastinated as long as they possibly can on this. And they hit a point where they don't want to work forever. And they're like, all right, like, here's what I've got. How do I retire? How do I make this money last? And so, I mean, you mentioned thinking about the future and your finances, but I mean, even if you're 60, there's still a lot of future ahead of you, right? There's, a good 30 years plus, if you're lucky with your health. So
Yeah, like 60 is the new 40 nowadays.
yeah. Yeah. And your odds, I think if you reach 65, your odds of hitting 90 are something like 80%. Like you have pretty good odds of, like, if you're going to die, you were going to die before then. So that's kind of
Is it too late sometimes when you work with somebody, or do we go by the view that yeah, you could be 63 or 67 and it's never too late?
yeah. I mean, sometimes people have to be a little bit more creative, right? Like if they haven't saved a lot of money prior to that. But I mean, there's a few levers you can pull there, right? Like you can work part-time. So if you're like slowing down at 60, but you probably need to like double your money again, you can at least like work part-time to cover your living expenses, and then into your like mid or late 60s. And then like during that time, you're not pulling down your portfolio. Like you could get it to grow enough to like meet your needs. And then at that point, you've got more Social Security benefits coming in. So there's some ways you can finagle it. I mostly work with people who actually are pretty well prepared financially for retirement. But then there's a lot of issues that they're maybe not as prepared for going in. So they might have something between like $500,000 and $5 million of investable assets. And it's kind of, there's a much more personal component to it, where they're looking at, the next 30 years of their lives, where like a lot of the things that got them to where they are today might need to change. Whether that's like their perspective on money and like their metrics for, oh, hey, I'm doing well financially because this number keeps going up every day. Because you're bringing in a paycheck, you're saving, you're investing. Whereas doing well financially in retirement is like, hey, are all of my assets protected? Am I like guarded against various scenarios? And is this money going to last? And I think most importantly, like, am I using my time, energy, and health as well as I can to have a good life? And I think that's kind of the thing that has to come first. And then all of the financial tools really support that purpose. But you kind of got to put money in its proper place there, I think.
How about risk versus reward? I think a lot of times that's on our radar, and especially, if somebody's reanalyzing things or having somebody new like you take a look at their portfolio, where do you sit with the risk thing?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of risks that have no reward whatsoever. So some of those, it's low hanging fruit, but I think that's a great place to start. That's typically where I do start with clients. So we actually have a couple of meetings before we really sit down and say, hey, here's what kind of a preliminary look at your retirement would look like. But in the course of that, it's like, hey, what's going on in your life? Who are the important people to you? What's your family situation like? Like, are you close with your parents? Do you see a scenario where you might be responsible financially for them if they need some help with like long-term care? Would you have to kind of put your own life on hold to help them with some of those like activities of living that, sometimes people just can't do at a certain age. I mean, I've seen some of that in my own family. I've seen it in other people's families.
Sure.
It's really impactful, and I don't think people do enough planning for it.
When is it okay? And I have two friends that are considering this. When is it okay to borrow against your, I believe it's their 401k. I think it's a 403b. Can't remember exactly what it is, but um, they're considering doing that because they're in a financial crunch right now. How do you make that determination? What are the
Yeah,
implications?
that's like one of the hardest questions, I think.
Hmm,
Hard because it's well, almost impossible to give generic advice that would apply to everybody.
sure.
Some things I would ask people about. I mean, what's the rest of their financial situation look like, right? Like, if they take this money out now, are they like torpedoing their retirement, 10 or 20 years down the line? Because then it's okay, that's a terrible decision. Don't do it. But then there's other people where it's like financially okay. It's pretty tax efficient. I don't know. At one point, I worked with younger couples who had their money tied up in their 401k and needed a down payment for a house. So they were able to borrow $70,000 out of that to put a down payment in. And that was in like 2019, and real estate's gotten a lot more expensive since then. So it ended up being a pretty good move for them. They were both really like financially savvy and careful with things. So I guess like the big red flag in my mind that comes up when people ask about it is like, hey, like to what extent are they rationalizing this? Are they using it to buy a boat, to like do something that's just kind of throwing money in a hole? Or is it something like, okay, they're using their assets properly and just using a little bit of leverage to get to where they want to go? And so I
Or
don't know. I mean,
financial hardship. Something may pop up and it's like, and don't have,
sometimes you have no choice. I've
yeah.
seen the aftermath of a decent amount of that as people start putting the pieces together.
Wow.
And that's a tough spot to be in. Like during COVID, I think that was kind of a common scenario. Congress actually passed a law to like um, punish people less for that. Like they put penalties on hold so that all you had to do is pay the taxes on the money out. Where normally if you take money out of your 401k before age 59 and a half, you have to pay like 10% penalty on that money,
Right.
which you don't get anything for that. It's just money gone to the IRS, um, to penalize, to discourage people from taking money out, so that they have enough money later in retirement. So
Is that the penalty that we're talking about there, the 10% under 59 and a half? Is that still in place? Did they relax that still?
yeah, they relaxed it for like 2 years, and then it's like back in effect now. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, how did this, we'll get back to, the nuts and bolts here, but I'm curious, how did this all begin for you, your journey with financial planning and helping people?
Yeah. So I like went to college for thinking I wanted to be a doctor, and then I interviewed a bunch of doctors, and they were all really unhappy. And like I had a professor who had us do a financial plan for ourselves, like if we were to become like doctors or whatever, like orthopedic surgeon, I think was kind of what I was leaning towards, because you could have like your own business, a private practice, and boy, those guys make a lot of money. So I was like, oh, this is a great thing for me to do. And then I did the financial plan, and it's like, oh boy, like it kind of works out to a bit of a wash, because you've got all these student loans. You don't start saving money till you're like in your mid 30s. And then you're still working the 12-hour days, 6 days a week. And so it's like if you love medicine and the work that you're doing, it's like a great fit. And like some people should absolutely be doctors, right? But for me, I just realized like, oh, this isn't what's interesting to me. Like the most interesting thing was like putting this financial plan together and thinking about life, and well, kind of designing what a great life looks like for me. And it's like, oh, and then I didn't realize that was even a job you could do until like 2 years later. I got a job at an investment firm, which I kind of got into like backwards, but I was like, oh, so this is a thing that like you can do for people and like make a living and like be of real use, right? So there's a lot of people who are unhappy with their life in some way, and if you're able to like help them arrange the financial pieces to free them up, so that money's not the limiting factor anymore, I mean, that's super rewarding. It's up there with saving lives, the way that like a doctor might save lives, but you're kind of saving quality of life, or almost like spiritually saving lives, I guess that way.
You know what's interesting? You came across this while you were, I guess, financially planning your future because you
Right.
rolled the numbers on the
Yeah.
loans and everything, in the medical career, and then looked at, the financial planning side. And
It's like the most fun assignment I did, like that whole
I
year
guess,
in
yeah,
college. Everything else was like not that interesting or fun.
but it was real. Like this is real life. This is how this looks like over here. This is how this looks like over here. Um, a lot of stress as a doctor, I have to believe,
Yeah. All the doctors I know are working their asses off. Yeah.
yeah. And it gets harder and harder because unless you're working for a big medical company, a firm, they're all swallowing the smaller practices up right now. So if you're doing it on your own, like God bless you, congrats. At least I'm in the New York area, and that's what's happening. It's almost impossible to find, an old school primary care physician that's not
Oh,
connected to the big one.
and primary care is probably the toughest spot for I think a lot of doctors because um, again, the folks I talked to who I resonated with were in primary care because the things that they liked about it were the things that I was interested in. You know, you have these long relationships with your patients. You get to
Mhm.
see like children grow up into adults. You get to be part of people's family for a long time. You get to be like a source of like comfort, stability, help people when like they're in pain. That seemed like very gratifying to me, and it's not that different from what I do today, honestly. But
Except you don't have to deal with insurance companies.
there's so
Yeah.
many things that are like difficult about being in primary care, and like I think increasingly they're spending less and less of their time with patients doing the value like the work they find rewarding and valuable, like
Yeah.
actually helping people, and just more and more time like charting and billing insurance, which sounds a little bit like hell to me, honestly. It's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm glad every day I wake up and I'm not a doctor, honestly.
Well, you know what? You looked at your future, and
Yeah,
that's what you're doing for your clients. When
right.
somebody comes to you, and I guess it would be different depending on where they are in life and their age. But what's the first thing you look at? What's the first indicator of is it their total sum of assets? Is it where everything is placed?
Uh, Honestly, it's just with where they are as people right now. The first question I ask is, well, what led you to seek out an advisor, and like what's going on right now that you're actually, pulling the trigger on this search as opposed to just kind of leaving it in the back of your head, like I should get that looked at. Like if your knee is bothering you, right, you're like, I should probably go see a physical therapist, but
Right.
it's not killing me. And then eventually it's like you go in and it's like, what changed? Usually there's some precipitating thought, or maybe you see some friends go through something and you're like, whoa, okay, like how do I avoid that? So it's different for everybody, and that's
Yeah.
what I ask them to start out.
What is the best return right now? I don't follow the markets too deeply, but if somebody had some assets, well, whatever the amount may be, yeah, I'm talking hundreds of thousands, let's say that, or 100,000.
Yeah.
Where would you say it's right now best to put their money in?
I mean, without knowing anything about their situation, like my default answer is like I can't give generalized investment advice, right? For retirees, I can tell you that
Let's
a
go there.
few,
Let's do that. Somebody is um 62
yeah,
and
62, thinking of retiring in the next year or so. A few of the key objectives that I'm going to be looking at for them is like, how do we avoid a scenario where you have like a really bad 10 years of investment returns? Because the needs for retirees are pretty different from the needs of someone who's accumulating assets. If you've got a job and you're saving and you got a paycheck and you're saving in your 401k every day, maybe you have like an ESOP plan or something at your employer. Um, it almost doesn't matter like how volatile your investments are, because you got like 20 years to wait. As long as it's not freaking you out and causing you to like panic sell at a bad time, like aiming for like the highest rate of return is probably the best thing to be doing, as long as your other like bases are covered. For a retiree though, they need that money like now or like 5 years from now. And it's actually pretty common for like growthier investments. So I mean, think about like the Nasdaq, like those like big tech companies that have produced like such great returns over the last decade. I think the Nasdaq's grown like 20% a year, out of the bottom of like '09. So it's, I mean, phenomenal. Like rarely do you get any investment that does that, and let alone like have a whole index grow at 20% a year is crazy. And so it's like great, like on paper you'd want that, right? But then you look back over the 10-year chunk before that, and like if you had bought those stocks in like the late '90s, you could have been underwater for like 10 years. And so if you had bought all of that, put say a retiree had like most of their portfolio or even half their portfolio in that, like early in retirement, and then it tanked, some stocks dropped like 70%, some were like 50% or so. Um, and it wasn't until really like 2015 that they were like back positive on that investment. So that's like 15 years where your assets are depressed and all of your lifestyle expenses are as high as ever. On top of which, your early 60s, you've got the health, you've got the energy to do projects, to travel, to do like big life experiences, to check off some bucket list items that you've been wanting to do as soon as you had the time away from your job. And so if you have like a bear market where like you have to be selling stocks because you haven't planned accordingly, that just devastates your financial plan. I mean, you can end up cutting your like sustainable income that you can live on by half or more. I mean, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. It could be like 70% cut in income if you do things the wrong way. So, the number one is like, how do we avoid that, right? It's like, okay, hey, we only got 6%, and then the market did 7%. It's like, okay, well, we can live with that. That's survivable. Like that, like that doesn't touch your daily life. But like, hey, we like outperform the market, but we're still down like 15% a year over like a 5-year period. That's really rough. So I qualitatively, that's what we're trying to avoid. And really, all the solutions we design around that are pretty particular to each person's scenario, right? Like some people have some rental real estate, some people have pensions, other people don't have pensions, right? Like if you're a school teacher, that's different from being like a self-employed entrepreneur who like maybe you have some business assets in your business. Maybe you're winding down your personal involvement, but you've got like a number two person taking over, and like there's a little bit of income coming from that, even if you're not having to be the guy like in the day-to-day operations all the time. So it gets really like specific to each person, like what the right mix should look like. But that's like the number one goal I tell people is like, hey, look, and like we can't guarantee anything. Obviously, there's no guarantees in life, but the goal and the objective is to avoid a lost decade of investing returns.
So you focus on people who are retiring, close to retiring, or retired.
Yeah, call them 55 and up.
Okay, 55 and up. What are some of the advantages that come with age? Now, one of them we talked about 59 and a half with your 401k. What are some of the other ones? Any others that stand out that are, advantages to being in your 60s?
I will say, the people I meet in their 60s are generally happier than the people in their 50s. And there's actually a good amount of research on this. Like, this isn't really probably what you had in mind when you're asking the question.
But I find it interesting, and I've heard the same.
People,
Yeah, sure.
yeah, and like my grandma would say something similar too, and she lived into her 90s. Like that, she was that. So statistically speaking, people are happier each decade as they get older. Like the unhappiest people are in their 20s, and the happiest people are like in the last decade of their life, which isn't what you would really expect if you're thinking of like, well, okay, so the person whose like body is shutting down on them versus like being like the picture of health. You would think the 20 something would be happier, but it's like just the more life experience you get, like the more perspective and like
Well, yeah,
the
you
easier
figured
it
it.
is to not let the small stuff get to you, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. A little bit older, and you figured it out, or you get closer to knowing what you really want.
Yeah. Yeah, you know yourself. I think
This is
that's
true.
the core of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and you may have gone through, life's challenges, maybe divorces, passings,
Oh yeah.
friendships moving in, moving out, things like that. But interestingly, and I know we're pivoting here, but if you look at, and this totally surprises me, but mental health crisis in the United States, guys that are in their 20s and 30s are
Yeah.
suffering isolation and loneliness. And when I was in my 20s, it's like, yeah, we're all hanging out, we're having a great time.
Right.
Maybe it's an offshoot of, to your point, maybe it's an offshoot of COVID. But the perception would be that, oh no, a bunch of guys are, hanging and they have friends and, let's go play golf, let's whatever, let's do our job. But maybe they're not sharing their emotions with
Right.
their buds, peers, whatever.
Yeah.
And they're keeping it inside, but it's a thing now, and I'm surprised it's guys, in their
Right.
20s and 30s. So kind of illustrates what we're
Yeah.
talking about here.
Well, and if you look at things that can kill you, like literally, like loneliness is like worse for you than smoking. Like we're just not meant to be isolated from one another. It's a horrible like place to be in where like you're cut off from like all the like resources, connection. I mean, even if you had everything you needed materially,
Yeah.
you can still be like really suffering if you're alone. Just like we do, it's like a fundamental need, maybe the most fundamental need I think of humans is to be with
100%.
others.
And isn't it ironic, Nicholas, that we have this thing called social media,
Yeah,
but it's anything but social in a lot of regards because you're
yeah, it's
you're
antisocial.
not
Yeah,
even connecting with somebody. In the moments we have
yeah, because there's so much
yeah,
ego. I think right, like it's
yeah,
posturing. You're trying to like defend your reputation, whatever you imagine that to be. I mean, my drug of choice is Twitter, so there's just tons of that on that, tons of toxic people. But I mean, it's what you make of it too. Like I found some really genuine connections there, and like a lot of you can rig your feed to fit with like a more positive.
yeah.
You can fill it up with positive stuff, good reminders, little like messages of like you're good enough, you're lovable.
Well, you know what? I think we need that because whether we realize it or not, in your social feed, you're seeing all this negativity. And
Yeah,
then it just becomes part of your life, and
yeah,
subconsciously, it's kind of just dogging you down, pulling you down.
yeah.
And I
It's
think
like
that,
a drug or something. Like it's an addiction. I mean,
yeah,
like any other addiction, like the negativity and like if you can break free of that and find like a more peaceful path for your life, good on you. I think that's like a great goal for anyone.
totally, yeah,
Yeah,
because stress also kills, and that can be stressful, like we talked
right.
about. Um,
Yeah.
how does somebody reach out to you? Who is a perfect person for you to work with?
Yeah. I mean, anyone who's thinking about retiring is, a potential fit. I might be able to help you out. I do an initial consultation call just to see, hey, are we a good fit? And I try to make that as valuable for each person as possible. So even if they're not don't end up working with me, they can still get some things on their radar of like, okay, hey, we should really think about how we're paying for our long-term care, for instance, or like, hey, here's a couple of risks as far as how things are set up with like our kids and our parents, whether that's like an estate plan thing. What are the things that we need to get in order? Because a lot of people aren't even aware of like the risks that they're taking until like the risk happens and then they wish they had done something.
Yeah. And I think that even holds true with we talked about the taking out your 401k and taking a loan against it. You might not
Right.
realize everything involved, and you might want to speak with somebody like yourself to see,
Yeah.
what the collateral damage could be down the road.
Well, yeah. And I mean, even in the short term, there's a few ways that can go wrong. So like you
Yeah.
gotta it's good to like ask for help when you're not like a subject matter expert on something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And ask for help when you don't really need it is better. Like I've been thinking about doing this as opposed to, yeah, I just took the money out. Now what?
Yeah.
How do we find you? What's your website, Nicholas?
www.pihlfinancialplanning.com, PIHL financialplanning.com. And I've got a link to sign up for that initial call. It's peppered throughout the website. It's pretty easy to find. I've got a blog on there. And I think you're just going to feel for a little bit my like philosophy and working with people and what that process looks like.
Man, I'm gonna be honest with you. You're like a breath of fresh air when it comes
Oh,
to what we're talking about, because
huh?
it's one of those things that you kind of avoid. I have a financial planner. He's okay, I don't hear from him. I'm not even kidding. Maybe once a year I get the phone call and he just talks about the market up and down and things like that. But looking at what you do and your mindset, it looks like you are truly plugged into your clients, and you have fresh passion, which is refreshing. It's really fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's the best compliment I've gotten in a while. And like,
I mean it. Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Your energy and your vibe is great. And
Right. Well, I think it should be fun, right? Like if we're doing work and helping people, like
yeah,
I think that's fun. And like if you're not connected to like other people, or you're not like having a really positive impact that you can point to and be like, oh, I used today well. Like today was a good use of my time. Like, I don't know. Like I think there's no other way I'd want to do it, you know?
agreed. And you're helping people with their future. I mean,
Mhm.
it's we talked about the surgeon, the doctor, and the responsibility there. It's a different type of responsibility, but it's a big one. And
Oh yeah.
yeah,
It is a lot of responsibility, and like it's a privilege to have that kind of trust from people too.
Yeah.
Yeah, try to live up to it.
Appreciate you being here today, Nicholas, and lots to talk about. Maybe next time we get together, we can pick another, specific topic.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Topic can go there as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think that'd be a lot of fun. And I thought this was a blast. So
Excellent.
yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks again.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, I mean, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.